Hi everyone, welcome to what will be my first ever video instructional. So bear with me, hopefully it'll be alright. So this week we are looking at texturing and particularly how you will get your model and your photo reference and your UVs and kind of meld them together to create a fairly realistic texture. Now, my example here that you can see is a banana which I've modeled. This is the close to final result, and I'm going to use this as the example today. So what we're going to do is we're going to create three texture maps. We're going to do a diffuse map, which is the basic color of the object. We're going to produce from that. That's going to be a base. Basically, once we have a diffuse map, we can usually, with a little bit of work, extract out some of the other maps we can use to generate some surface material kind of properties. So the three we're going to do is a diffuse. From the diffuse, we're going to extract out a reflection map. Now, the reflection map, for when we use it for our MIA shader, is also very similar to a specular map. So what we're covering is kind of the basics. And the third one is a bump map. So this is the kind of like a relief map. It gives you a little bit of bumpy surface. You might be able to see on the banana here. You zoom a little bit in on the bump so you can see there's a little bit of light that's been caught on the little nicks and bumps of the banana. So those three maps will get you quite far. Obviously there's much more that you can put into the MIA material shader, but these three will get you kind of 70–80% of through most of your work. As I mentioned, this stuff's from photographic material. I highly recommend you use photographic reference, and preferably to do it yourself, but there are repositories for other people's reference that you can use. So this is our goal this week, and bear with me. This is a great example how which I'm going to show you is how your UVs affect how you end up texturing an object. I didn't do a particularly great job on my banana, and we'll be able to see that as we get working on it. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is we'll jump into Maya, and you can see my model here. This is my sub D banana. Now, as you can see, I've gotten some orthographic reference from it, and I've also used the distance measuring tool to get the correct scale. So this is about 16 centimeters long. It's fairly okay looking. It's not the greatest model in the world, but it's pretty good. I've also put these elements into their own little layer so we can turn them on and off again, which is very helpful. So your tutors will be able to show you this. As well as that, I've also created a background. So I've got a little scene here all set up, and as you can see here on the side, I also have a light set up, which is just two lights. I've got a key light here. Key light's the smaller one, and a fill light the larger one. So this just gives us some nice lighting. When we are texturing, we actually don't want to have any lighting as it's quite confusing for us to see in Maya, but that's all ready to set up and render. So we go and have a look at my render scene. You can see it's all ready to kind of roll. So the first thing we need to do is, if we go to our banana, the first thing we need to do is to get our UVs out of Maya and into Photoshop. So here you can see my UVs. I've gone for a fairly continuous surface, so we've got a big long seam on one side and the other, and there's a little bit of seam here. I've done this, I thought which would be a good way to do it, but it's turned out I chose a really bad seam, which is right on the front, which is kind of difficult, but it's a good example to show you how to deal with it. Anyway, so here are UVs. They're all in the 0 to 1 range of the UV, and what we want to do is get that to Photoshop. So we kind of snapshot this. So we can go to polygons. Down the very bottom there's UV snapshot. Okay, so this gives us a file name to where we're going to send it to. So we can sending it to I can see at the top there, sending it to images. We actually want to send it to whip. Okay, you can see I've already got one here, uvs.tga. So let's call this one UVs. Okay, so the important thing here is the size. We want, I would probably say for the most, for your large objects, you want to go for 2048 by 2048 size. So that's a 2K texture. For smaller objects, you're probably going to want more like a 1K texture. For really small stuffs, you could go down to 512. But for this, you don't want to go bigger than 2K. Now, another great thing to just discuss here is that all textures are square. Now, they're square basically because our UV space is square as well. So we don't want rectangular textures, because they will just be squished into a square anyway. So we've got a square texture that we're working to, and usually you go to the power of 2, which means, if you know, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, 2048, etc. Computers like that because they scale better, and generally it's a good habit to get into. Now, I highly recommend you use Targa. If you try and save it as a Photoshop file, it just won't work. So a Targa file is great. So we can go OK. And that will have saved that file off to Photoshop. Now, let's just jump back a moment. The first thing which is really useful to do is make sure you have set your project. I'm not sure how efficiently the tutors have explained this, but it's really important that you set your project before you start. You can go down to Project here and Set Project, and you choose the directory where your file is in. So wherever your working directory is, we want that. So mine is, where are we? See if I can find mine. Dropbox. Oh dear. What a mess. Ah, there it is. 27132. Okay. So banana texturing. So that's my working directory. So that has all my stuff in it. You can see it's got my scenes and my images and my textures. So I choose that set. Now this is really important that you set your project directory, because set your project, because when you start linking files, it will want to, if you haven't set a project, it'll try and look for the long form file directory rather than looking inside itself. Hard to explain, but it means that your files will be correctly linked even if you move that folder around and about. Okay. Anyway, make sure you do that at the beginning. Set your project before you start working. So back to Photoshop. So if we go and we open our UVs, so we saved it into images. No, we saved it into work in progress. So our UVs will come in looking like this. So it'll be white on a black background, and the folder will be locked. So the first thing we want to do, we want to invert that so it's white on black. So you can do that by Command I or Alt I, or you can go image, I think there's image invert, is in here somewhere. Yeah, there we go, invert. And we want to double click the background so it's unlocked. We want to create a new layer, which we can call it diffuse. Yes. We want to put that layer below, and we'll just give it a default color at the moment, so let's make it like a pink. Okay, so now we have our UVs. So we want to name our UVs UVs, and we want to make that layer a different kind of blend mode. So at the moment it's normal, which means you can't see my red layer underneath. So we want to convert that layer to be a multiply. So this just means it'll anything that's darker than white, it'll add multiply to the layer below. So now you can see we have a really good frame that we can kind of use to get painted. We have a good kind of we're kind of all ready to go here really. So the first thing I would do here is lock this layer. You can use this lock here. That means you can't select it and you can't move it accidentally. So that's great. And it's a good time to save. So let's save that as let's just call this test scene. Oops, let's call this banana start. Okay, so now we're all ready to roll. Mentioned we're ready to go. What we're going to do now is we're going to jump back into Maya and get our MIA material applied to our banana and get some basic values kind of in that we can use to guide us when we are working with our textures. Specifically our reflective texture. So if we jump back into Maya, now we do all of our material work and our shader work in the hypershade. So you can find the hypershade up in where are you? Windows, render editors, where are you? Rendering editors, and hypershade. And it looks like this. So what we have is our pool of shaders at the top here, and you can click through to whatever's in your scene. Various bits and bobs. It's like a little browser. In this large area we have a kind of a node system, so we can see how things are kind of connected. As you can see, I have a MIA banana start shader all kind of ready to roll, and we have a preview up here. If you have it set to mental ray, it'll give you a really good preview. It's actually so good you don't actually really need to test render usually. You can usually get a pretty good feel for the quality and the surface of your shader just through using this material viewer. And below it we have our attributes, which is what we're kind of most interested in at the moment. So if I go back to my banana and I apply my banana start texture. So this is just a basic MIA shader. And you can see here, I'm just going to get rid of that material viewer because it's a bit annoying. So you can see here, this has come through pretty much. I've tweaked a few things here and there, but what you want to do is kind of set the values to get the look and feel for roughly the surface you want. Now there's a few key things that you want to kind of attack at this point. Obviously we don't need to worry about a diffuse color, but the first value is the roughness. We want to make sure that the surface is the correct kind of roughness. Basically the rougher it is, you might be able to see in that little window, the less rough it is, you get more of a gradient from the front of the surface to the back, whereas if it's rougher, it's a much consistent, even kind of shape. So looking at my banana reference, I know the roughness is about here. It's not too rough. a little bit rough. Now the next thing, we want to kind of get a rough feel for the reflection. So I've got some values here that I've tested and rendered that give me a surface reflectivity which is just about right for the banana. So it's, you can see it's relatively reflective, but it's not very glossy. So that gives me a kind of rough banana-y feel. Don't worry about the samples, that's all for later. We don't have any advanced reflection or refraction because it's not a see-through banana. We want to go down here and make sure ambient occlusion is turned on. So this will give us the little contact shadows that will make it feel like the object is really well seated. So always turn that on if you can. But the extra thing we're kind of interested in this thing called is BRDF. Now BRDF is kind of a little bit hard to explain. There's lots of kind of Google it basically, but it's a system of kind of modeling the reflectivity of an object. By default, it will probably have Fresnel reflection clicked on. I recommend you turn that off and you manually adjust these two properties. These are the two important ones. So what these are, so 0 degree reflection is basically saying how reflective is the object surface when it is directly facing you. So if this was up to 1, it means it would be perfectly reflective when a surface was directly facing you. And the 90 degree angle means the directional, if a surface is 90 degrees away from your view, so if you think about the outside surface of a ball rather than the front, that's how reflective it is around that edge. Now the Fresnel reflection, basically it's a set kind of reflectivity, which means that when the facing angle of a surface is more oblique away from you, it will be more reflective. Now it's quite harsh, and that's why I generally have it turned off. You'll get some really weird artifacting, and it's pretty easy to adjust these settings and get the feel for it. And with these settings, you can kind of model most surface reflectivity of objects through using these two values. Now the BRDF curve is basically how these two kind of blend together across the model. You can kind of leave that as it is, and that should be fine. But as I mentioned, it's kind of useful. I think it's probably a very subtle example, but oops, I don't want to render. I have two examples you might see here. If you look at this edge just there, you can see a very subtle edge. So this is Fresnel reflection, and that's with it, with my custom BRDF. It's kind of subtle, but when we start getting reflection maps and those kinds of things, it'll really change it, especially the bump map. Anyway, we have a default setup surface. So we've got a rough banana feel for us. So whether you're going for wood or whatever, you've got the right reflectivity set up. And then we are ready to start with our diffuse map. Back to Photoshop. Now this is what the final diffuse map looks like for the banana example I have here. You can see it's very flat. There's no lighting information, or very little, and we just kind of have a surface color for a lot of it. It's not perfect, it's not great, but it does the trick for us at the moment. Now the reference imagery that I shot myself, the banana I bought from down at the store, and I just used my phone camera to shoot it. Now the reference I got was actually really bad, and you can see why, because of the shadows. All this light information, all the light and the darks, means this is actually quite bad reference, and I had to spend quite a lot of time painting out, using various Photoshop tricks, painting out the shadows, so I'm left with just the colour. I highly recommend, if you shoot your own reference imagery, that you try and light it as well as possible, and if you can, and it's a cloudy day, take it outside and shoot it with an overcast day, and you'll get a much flatter and a much easier to texture surface reference. So anyway, this is what I had to work with, and you can see some of the tricks I did to get there. So this is what as I mentioned, this is what the final banana looked like, so it looks quite different. Let's go back to our banana start. So this is where we're at. Let's rotate that to the side there. Okay. The first thing is we want to get our banana reference in. So best bet here is to, let's load up some reference. Now I'm actually going to use my orthographic reference because it actually was a little better. So we're going to grab that one, and we might grab that one. And we need one of the sticker. Maybe that might be enough for us just for this example. This is obviously quite a long process. I can't do it in the 5 or 10 minutes I have to show you this section. So you just have to, I'll probably cut through the process a little bit. I'll just show you one section and then we'll just move on and imagine that I've magically painted the whole thing. For this texture for myself, just out of reference, it probably took me about an hour, maybe an hour and a half or two to get it to that stage. Probably more like an hour actually. So once we have our photo reference, the first thing we really want to do is to cut it out. We'll just very roughly cut that out and bring it into our scene here. Banana. Now we're going to use this, probably this one quite a bit. So we want to first of all just make sure it's, actually we'll duplicate that and we'll just use that one as this. So let's shrink that down. You want to kind of make sure you don't transform your objects too much, your layers at the moment, but we just need to get it so it's kind of within QE of our scene. That's great. Okay, so we can just delete all of this white stuff and very just roughly edit it out. It doesn't have to be done super amazingly, just enough to get rid of this white background. Okay, now the texture that I have here that I ended up with, most of it came from this one side of the banana. I've just repeated it and stamped it. So the first thing we really want to do is try and flatten out some of the yellow. Get rid of some of this kind of shadows. You can see the gradient. So the first thing we can do is use our dodge and burn tool. So down here, dodge and burn. Now dodge and burn are old photographic terms if you've ever done manual photography. Dodge means to lighten up and the burn means to darken down. It's fairly simple. So the dodge tool, we want to kind of lighten up these shadow areas. So you can see up here it's got the mid-tones, exposure at 16, but you can see if I just gently paint this here, I can start to flatten out the shadows. And get it kind of relatively even. So you can see if I push it too hard, I'm going to get this white fringing. So I just want to undo that. Okay, so that's not too bad. Just a little bit dark in here. Now that's generally about the banana-y colour I want, so I'm going to just sample that using the eyedropper with eye. I'm going to take a section here, and I'm just going to fill my diffuse background here with that colour. Okay. Now you want to. This is a great way to blend seams. If you have an overall kind of roughly correct colour, it means that you can get away with kind of working over seams by just basically kind of erasing back to that base color. Anyway, you can see I've still got a bit of shadowing here. Now, rather than dodging anymore, I'm going to use my paintbrush. So I'm going to paint that banana using my paintbrush, and I'm going to change the mode. I'm going to change the mode to be lighten. Now this means whatever I paint, it's going to lighten that to that value. So if I pick a yellow, now here's a trick for you. Up here you can lock the opacity of a layer. So if we hit that little button there over in our layers panel, that means I can't paint outside of that layer. So if I paint like this, you can see I'm not painting outside the object. So that's opacity lock. So if I use that lighten, I can kind of pick a color of the yellow here and brush it around the edge. I'm going to be a bit judicious about this, but you can see that I can kind of very carefully paint out some of that. See, if I use it too much, it kind of lightens too much. But that's pretty good. I think that's fine for us. So let's turn off that opacity lock in our layers. And I'm just going to go around and I'm going to gently erase back some of that white. So you can see now that yellow kind of blends in with our background colour a bit. I can always adjust that later, but that's got us pretty close. Okay, now what we want to do, we obviously want to remove that label because we're going to add it in later, so we can just totally erase that out. And also down here we have some reflectivity on our model. So we don't want that, sorry, on our texture. We want to remove that. So we can do, with our brush, we can do the same thing when we lightened it. So we're going to set our opacity lock on for the layer. And instead of lighten, we're going to darken. So this is whatever value we click, it'll darken the value that's lighter than that to that value. So you can see we have some white there. If I just paint this, you'll see it'll kind of magically go away. Those little white bits will look quite weird on our model. So I want to get rid of them. So that's pretty good. Anything else? We'll probably give the whole thing a little bit of a rub with that. Even it out even more. Now you can see it's really starting to blend in with that yellow, which is great. Really flattened it out. So you can see now we can start to kind of start to place that on our model. On our in our UVs. So let's call this layer banana, something like that. Let's put it below the UV layer. This up here, which is our original, we can we'll keep. Let's call it source. But this really is our new source, actually. So we'll delete that. Yeah. So this is our new source for our banana. So let's duplicate that off. Source. That's pretty. We've already processed it a bit. Okay, so the first thing. So what we've basically got a great one side of a banana. So obviously, if we have good, if we've got some good reference, we can do this right now to a whole bunch of angles of bananas and do the same thing for it and set them as a kind of like a source for our texture. We're at a point now where we can start to use bits of this or whole areas of it and basically squish and transform it into the shape of our UVs. So we can, so the first thing for this one, I've got a banana copy, let's just call it 1. I'm going to put it up here. So I'm going to place it in this. This is basically the back of my banana. I'm going to start there. So the first thing I can do is, if you press Command T or Control T, you can go to transform, I think, or you can go edit free transform. Yeah, and this allows us to rotate, to scale. But also, if you look up the top panel here, there's a little icon, and this is warp. So this is where you can kind of adjust the texture's geometry with a little grid. So you can see here we can kind of bend it and squish it and twist it. So we want to kind of rotate this banana section here. I'm going to roughly get it to the size we want. So I'm going to actually split it in half. So that looks okay there. Now I could, at this point, transform it, hit the transform button and kind of start to squish this down to fit. Now if I do this, it'll start, you can see on our little old banana marks, they're going to start to stretch a little bit. So we're not going to do that. We're just going to transform our banana and just kind of get it initially roughly into shape, and then cut it in half. So we want this front section with to be kind of right, and then we're going to cut it in half and place the other section kind of to fit. So that looks okay. I might just transform so I can bend this bit to kind of fit a bit better. Make sure you give a bit of padding, so go outside the texture if you can, otherwise you'll have to paint it a little bit. So here you can see that kind of fits quite nicely in. You can accept that. Lovely. So this area here is working quite nicely. So now we can select our lasso, this other half here. It can be quite rough with this at the moment because we can stamp out any problems. And we'll transform it again, and we'll rotate it. We can try and place it here. So now you can see the problem with my UVs. Basically I've bent my banana in the wrong direction, so I still have to transform it to get it to fit, which means I'm still going to get a bit of warping on my banana dots, which is going to be kind of hard to avoid. That'll do. So you can see we kind of have it roughly in the space now. So we can then go through and just kind of transform little bits just to get them just exactly where we want them. So we want that seam edge to be just there. So we know that's where it is. And if we get any edges like this, we can use our stamp tool to kind of erase it out. So we have, if you look over here on our toolbar, we have a little stamp. So we click on that. This is the clone stamp, very helpful tool. If you alt click, this will be the source. And if you let go, you can then paint from the source. So you can see you can kind of paint out that seam kind of nicely. Another thing you can do is also use content aware delete. It might be on a newer version of Photoshop, but I won't show you that. but that can also be useful. So that's fine. Pretty good. Now I've just realized a problem. I need this mark to kind of line up with one of my edges. So I'm going to actually select that and drag it down. Rotate it a bit. That's a bit better. And of course I've kind of marked this area up here, so I might just quickly paint the green in here. Now overall I would say you generally want to try and not paint and use as much photo reference as you can. The more photo reference you use, the more likely you are to get a more realistic effect. The more you paint, the more it's going to start to stylize no matter how hard you try. But a little bit of painting now and then works. You can see it all kind of blends in nicely. Okay, so you can kind of see I have one side of the banana all kind of ready. So if you take what I just did there and kind of expand that out to all the rest of my banana, you can kind of see how you could squish your texture to be into your full UV set. Now, as I mentioned, I have this top seam here fits along here, and this is where having that good yellow background is, because we can just if we just erase out to that yellow at that seam, we always know that it's always going to blend fine. It's always going to blend to that yellow or whatever our background color is. Got a bit of a problem with you. Just paint that. Expand that out. Yep. Okay. Now this is a real good time to save, and we also want to test this on our model. So if we jump back to Maya, we can connect our Photoshop file to our banana diffuse texture, to our Maya material, and to see what it looks like. So if we go over to our